It was a typical Wednesday morning when Mrs. Evelyn Harper walked into my office. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of her expensive perfume. I could tell she was well off just by looking at her. Tailored suit, designer handbag, and a demeanor that screamed wealth and desperation. She took a seat in front of my cluttered desk, her eyes darting around as if searching for something tangible to hold on to. "My husband is cheating on me," she said, her voice trembling. "I need you to find out for sure." As a private investigator specializing in infidelity cases, I'd heard this line more times than I could count. But something about Mrs. Harper's plea felt different, more urgent, more desperate. I nodded, leaning back in my chair, and asked her to elaborate. "His name is Thomas Harper. He's been acting strange lately, coming home late, secretive phone calls, unexplained absences. I've tried confronting him, but he always has an excuse. I can't take it anymore. I need to know the truth." I agreed to take the case, my curiosity piqued. We went over the details. His routine, favorite haunts, friends, and any suspicious behavior she had noticed. As she spoke, I jotted down notes, forming a mental picture of Thomas Harper. A successful businessman, mid-40s, well-respected in the community, exactly the type who'd think he could get away with infidelity. After she left, I started my usual routine: background checks, surveillance plans, and prepping my camera equipment. My gut told me this case would be more than just another cheating husband, but I didn't know how right I was. The next morning, I parked my car a few houses down from the Harper residence. It was a quiet, affluent neighborhood with manicured lawns and white picket fences, the kind of place where secrets were buried deep under layers of pretension. From my vantage point, I watched as Thomas Harper emerged from his front door, looking every bit the part of the successful executive in his tailored suit and polished shoes. I followed him discreetly through the bustling streets of downtown. He made stops at his usual places: his office, a coffee shop, a business lunch at a high-end restaurant. It all seemed normal until I saw him slip out the back door of his office around 3 p.m. Intrigued, I followed, keeping my distance. He drove to a modest apartment complex on the other side of town, an odd choice for a man of his stature. I watched as he entered one of the units. My heart pounded with the thrill of the chase. This was it, the moment I would catch him in the act. I waited for an hour, then another. Just as I was about to give up, he re-emerged, looking a bit disheveled. I snapped a few photos, documenting his every move. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was he meeting? What was he hiding? That evening, I returned to my office to review the day's findings. As I flipped through the photos, my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Harper. "Any news?" she asked, her voice filled with anxiety. "Not yet," I replied, not wanting to jump to conclusions, "but I'll keep you posted." As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The next few days followed a similar pattern: Thomas Harper's seemingly normal routine, punctuated by his visits to the mysterious apartment. Each time I grew more determined to uncover the truth. Little did I know, the truth would hit closer to home than I ever imagined. As days turned into a week, Thomas Harper's routine became all too familiar to me. Each morning he'd leave his immaculate suburban home, play the role of the dedicated executive, then slip away to that nondescript apartment. I documented everything meticulously, but so far, I hadn't seen anyone else entering or leaving the apartment. Curiosity gnawed at me. Who was he meeting? What was he hiding? On the 8th day of surveillance, I decided to take a more proactive approach. I needed to get inside that apartment. I parked my car in a secluded spot and waited for Thomas to leave. My heart raced as he finally emerged, locking the door behind him. As soon as he was out of sight, I made my move. Breaking into the apartment was easier than expected. The lock was old and simple, a surprising choice for someone as cautious as Thomas Harper. Inside, the apartment was sparsely furnished, almost impersonal. It didn't match the man I had been following. There were no signs of a second occupant, no personal touches, no feminine presence. I searched the place thoroughly, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. I found a laptop on the kitchen table and decided to take a risk. Hacking into it was not part of my usual repertoire, but desperate times called for desperate measures. After a few minutes, I was in. What I found shocked me. Emails, documents, and photos, all evidence of an affair. But the woman in the photos was someone I never expected, my own wife, Emily. My mind reeled, and I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Emily, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was the one cheating on me. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this be happening? My thoughts spiraled as I tried to make sense of it all. Emily and Thomas. How long had this been going on? Why would she do this to me? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I copied the files onto a flash drive, locked the apartment back up, and drove home in a daze. That evening, I confronted Emily. She was sitting in the living room, reading a book, looking so innocent and unsuspecting. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking, "we need to talk." She looked up at me, confusion and concern written all over her face. "What is it, Alex?" "I know about you and Thomas Harper," I blurted out, unable to hold back any longer. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, then quickly to something else, something I couldn't quite place. "Alex, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "Explain what? That you've been cheating on me? That you've been lying to me for who knows how long?" My voice was rising, fueled by anger and betrayal. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, just let me explain." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Fine, explain." Emily looked down, gathering her thoughts. "Thomas and we've known each other for a long time. Before you and I even met. He was an old friend, someone I trusted. We reconnected a few months ago and things got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean you started an affair behind my back?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I never meant for it to happen. It was a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake." I wanted to believe her, but the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the emails, they told a different story. I stood there, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartache. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Please, Alex, I love you. I want to make this right." I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of the woman I fell in love with. "We'll see," I said finally, turning away. "We'll see." That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. The woman I loved had betrayed me, and I had no idea what to do next. But one thing was clear. My investigation had taken a turn I never saw coming. The days that followed felt like I was living in a haze. Every corner of my house, every memory shared with Emily now felt tainted by her betrayal. I found myself questioning everything, every smile, every laugh, every intimate moment. Was it all a lie? Had she been thinking of him during those times? Work became my only escape. I buried myself in other cases, mundane compared to the mess that had become my personal life. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the image of Emily with Thomas Harper haunted me. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, constantly reminding me of what I'd lost, what I'd never truly had. Emily was walking on eggshells around me, desperate to mend what she had broken. She cooked my favorite meals, tried to engage in small talk, and even suggested counseling. But I was too far gone, too hurt to consider any of it. The distance between us grew with each passing day, a chasm I wasn't sure we could ever bridge. One night, as I sat alone in my office, staring blankly at my computer screen, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line simply read, "You need to know." My heart skipped a beat as I clicked it open. The email was brief, but what it contained sent a shiver down my spine. "The man you are investigating is more dangerous than you think. He's involved in something bigger than an affair. Be careful, or you might find yourself in more trouble than you bargained for." Attached was a video file. With trembling hands, I clicked play. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, but it was unmistakably Thomas Harper. He was in a dimly lit room, talking to a man I didn't recognize. Their conversation was low, but I could make out enough to realize they were discussing something illegal, drug deals, money laundering, maybe even something worse. My mind raced. This was far beyond anything I had expected. Thomas Harper wasn't just a cheating husband, he was involved in organized crime. And my wife, Emily, was somehow connected to it all. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was something much bigger, something dangerous. I needed to find out more, but I had to be careful. Whoever sent me that email knew who I was and what I was doing. If Thomas or his associates found out I was onto them, I could be in serious danger. But I couldn't back down now. Not after everything I had uncovered. I decided to confront Emily again, but this time I would be smarter about it. I needed answers, and I needed them without tipping her off that I knew more than she thought. That night, I sat across from her at the dinner table, forcing myself to act normal. She looked at me with those familiar eyes full of worry and regret. "How was your day?" she asked cautiously, as if afraid to set me off. "Busy," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I had a lot of work to catch up on." She nodded, pushing her food around on her plate. "I miss us, Alex," she said softly. "I miss how we used to be." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to lash out. "So do I said instead, trying to sound genuine. "But I need time, Emily. This isn't something I can just get over." She looked down, tears pooling in her eyes. "I understand. I just want you to know that I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I studied her face, trying to determine if she was being sincere. If she was, then she was also in way over her head. If she wasn't, then she was playing a dangerous game. Either way, I had to tread carefully. "I need to go out for a bit," I said, pushing back from the table. "Now?" "Where are you going?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "Just for a drive," I replied, grabbing my keys. "I need some air." She nodded, not pressing further, and I left the house, my mind racing with possibilities. As I drove aimlessly through the darkened streets, I replayed the video in my mind. Thomas Harper was not who he seemed, and neither, apparently, was Emily. I had to get to the bottom of this, but I couldn't do it alone. The only person I could think of was an old friend from my police days, someone who might have connections to the underworld. But reaching out to him would mean admitting that my life was spiraling out of control, that I was in over my head. I wasn't ready to face that truth. Yet as I drove, the weight of the situation bore down on me. I had no choice. This was bigger than me, bigger than my marriage. If I didn't act, it could cost me more than just my pride. It could cost me my life. The following day, I found myself standing outside a dingy bar on the outskirts of town. The kind of place that didn't ask questions, where people went to forget. My contact, Jake Marlowe, was already inside, nursing a whiskey at the far end of the bar. He looked the same as I remembered, tough, grizzled, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that had seen too much. "Alex?" He greeted me with a nod as I slid onto the stool next to him. "Jake," I replied, signaling the bartender for a drink. "Thanks for meeting me." "Didn't think I'd hear from you again after you left the force," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "What's got you all twisted up?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I've got a situation. It's complicated." He raised an eyebrow. His interest piqued. "Complicated how? You in some kind of trouble?" "Not exactly," I said, my voice low. "But I'm dealing with something that's way out of my league. I'm investigating a guy. Thought it was just a standard infidelity case, but it turns out he's mixed up in some serious criminal activity." Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "And you're caught in the middle of it." "Something like that," I admitted. "I need to know more about this guy, Thomas Harper. He's not just some businessman, he's into something big, and I've got reason to believe my wife is somehow involved." Jake's eyes narrowed, his demeanor shifting from casual to serious. "Your wife? Jesus, Alex, what the hell have you gotten yourself into?" "I wish I knew," I muttered, taking a long drink. "But I need your help, Jake. I need to know who Harper is, what he's involved in, and how deep this goes." Jake was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the amber liquid in his glass. "You're playing with fire, Alex." If this guy is who I think he is, you're in way over your head." "That's why I came to you," I said, my voice pleading. "I don't have anyone else I can trust." He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his graying hair. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But you need to be careful. If Harper's involved in what I think he is, then he's got connections, dangerous ones." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. "Thanks, Jake. I owe you." "Damn right you do," he grumbled, finishing his drink. "But don't think this is going to be easy. Whatever you're looking for, it might not be something you want to find." With that ominous warning, we parted ways, and I headed back home, my mind racing. I knew Jake would come through for me. He always did. But what he might uncover terrified me. If Thomas Harper was as dangerous as Jake hinted, then I was in deeper than I ever imagined. When I arrived home, Emily was waiting for me in the living room, her face etched with worry. "You were gone a long time," she said quietly. "I needed to clear my head," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "Alex, please," she pleaded, stepping closer to me. "Let's talk about this. Let me explain everything." "Not now, Emily," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm tired and I've got a lot on my mind." She looked hurt, but she didn't push further. "All right, but whenever you're ready, I'm here." I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. Despite everything, a part of me still loved her, still wanted to believe there was a way to fix this. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the evidence of her betrayal, knew that things could never go back to the way they were. That night I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. The events of the past few weeks played over and over in my mind, a twisted reel of memories and doubts. I thought about the email, the video, and the mysterious sender who seemed to know more about my situation than I did. Whoever they were right. I was in over my head, but I was also in too deep to back out now. I had to see this through, no matter where it led. Because somewhere buried beneath the lies and deception was the truth, and I needed to find it, even if it destroyed everything I had left. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap into my throat, half expecting it to be Jake with news that would shatter whatever semblance of stability I had left. Emily continued her attempts to reach out, her eyes filled with unspoken apologies, but I kept her at arm's length. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not until I had the answers I needed. Finally, Jake called. His voice was gruff and serious, lacking the usual banter that accompanied our conversations. "Meet me at the usual spot, we need to talk." The usual spot was an old diner on the edge of town, a relic from our days on the force when we'd meet for late-night coffee and strategizing. As I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted Jake's car parked near the back, away from prying eyes. I walked in, the bell above the door jangling softly, and found him sitting in a corner booth, nursing a cup of black coffee. "Alex," he greeted me with a nod, his expression grim. "Sit down." I slid into the booth opposite him, trying to read the look on his face. "What did you find?" Jake sighed heavily, rubbing a hand over his stubbled chin. "Thomas Harper is bad news, just like I suspected. He's involved in a lot more than just extramarital affairs. The guy's knee-deep in organized crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, you name it." My heart sank as his words confirmed my worst fears. "And Emily? Is she involved?" Jake hesitated, his eyes flicking to mine, then away. "This is the part you're not going to like, Alex. There's no easy way to say it, so I'm just going to come out with it. Emily's more than just a bystander. She's been in contact with the authorities. Looks like she's been working with them to bring Harper down." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the implications of what he'd just said. "What? That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't she tell me? Why keep me in the dark?" "Probably because she knew how close you were to finding out about the affair," Jake said, his voice tinged with sympathy. "If you knew the truth, it would have blown her cover. And from what I've gathered, this operation has been in the works for months, maybe even years. She couldn't risk it. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. Emily had been playing a dangerous game, one that I was completely unaware of. So she's an informant? A double agent?" "Something like that," Jake confirmed. "But it's more complicated than that, Alex. Harper's onto her. He might not know exactly what she's up to, but he suspects something. That's why you've been getting those mysterious warnings. Someone on the inside is trying to keep you out of the crossfire. I leaned back in the booth, trying to catch my breath. The woman I'd been married to for years, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been living a double life. And now I was caught in the middle of a war I didn't even know existed. "What do I do now, Jake?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've got two choices," Jake said, his eyes locking onto mine. "You can walk away. Cut your losses. Let the authorities handle it. Or you can dive deeper. Find out exactly what's going on and why Emily kept you in the dark. But if you choose the latter, you need to be prepared for whatever comes your way. This isn't just about saving your marriage anymore, Alex. This is about survival." I stared down at the table, my mind racing. Walking away meant losing Emily for good, abandoning her to the mess she'd entangled herself in. But diving deeper, that meant risking everything, my safety, my freedom, my sanity. The choice felt impossible, but I knew deep down what I had to do. "I can't walk away, Jake," I finally said, my voice steady. "I need to know the truth, all of it." Jake nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "All right, but if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. I'll keep digging, see if I can find out who's behind those warnings and how deep Emily's involvement goes. But you need to keep a low profile. If Harper's onto her, it won't be long before he's onto you too." I left the diner feeling more conflicted than ever. The weight of the situation bore down on me, but so did a renewed sense of determination. Emily had been keeping secrets, but so had I. If there was any hope of salvaging what was left of our relationship, I needed to confront her, not just with anger and betrayal, but with the truth. I had to lay it all out and see if there was anything worth saving. That evening I returned home, the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders. Emily was in the kitchen, washing dishes, her back to me. I stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the one who had deceived me. "Emily," I called out, my voice soft yet firm. She turned around, her eyes searching mine. "Alex?" "We need to talk," I said, stepping closer. "About everything." Her expression faltered, and I saw the fear and guilt flash in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered, drying her hands on a towel. "Let's talk." We sat across from each other at the dining table, a place where we'd shared countless meals and conversations, though none as fraught with tension as this one. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of all that had been left unsaid for far too long. "I know about Thomas," I began, cutting through the silence. "I know about the affair. But that's not all, is it?" Emily's eyes widened, and she clasped her hands tightly on the table, her knuckles turning white. "How did you find out?" "It doesn't matter how," I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. "What matters is why, Emily. Why didn't you tell me? Why keep me in the dark?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to reveal. "Alex, I never wanted any of this. I never meant to hurt you. But things spiraled out of control before I even realized what was happening." "Spiraled out of control," I repeated, incredulous. "You're not just having an affair, Emily. You're involved in something way more dangerous. You've been working with the authorities, haven't you? Trying to bring Harper down." Emily's face paled, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then she nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes. I've been working with them for the past year. It started out as something small, just feeding them information, trying to stay close to Thomas so I could gather intel. But then it got bigger, more dangerous, and I couldn't pull out without jeopardizing everything." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the hurt in my voice evident. "Why didn't you trust me enough to let me in on what was going on?" "Because I was trying to protect you, Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "If you knew, you would have been in danger too. And after what happened with us, after I got involved with Thomas, I didn't think you'd ever forgive me. I thought it was better if I handled it alone." "Better," I echoed, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "You thought it was better to lie to me, to keep me in the dark while you put yourself in harm's way." "I know it was wrong," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. But please, Alex, believe me when I say that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with him, it was always you. I was just trying to fix the mess I'd made. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the love we once shared. But the betrayal cut too deep, the lies too thick to simply brush aside. Emily, this isn't just about us anymore, I said, my voice strained. This is about survival. Thomas Harper is dangerous, and now he's onto you, onto both of us. If we're going to get out of this alive, we need to be honest with each other from here on out. She nodded, wiping away her tears. I know. I'll tell you everything, Alex, I promise. Start from the beginning, I said, leaning forward. How did you get involved with Harper? What exactly are you doing for the authorities? Emily took a shaky breath and began to recount the story, her voice filled with regret and fear. It started about a year ago after I ran into Thomas at a charity event. We'd known each other in college, but we lost touch after that. When we reconnected, it was like a whirlwind. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I needed at the time. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to listen without interrupting. At first, it was just lunch, a few phone calls. But then it turned into something more, something I couldn't control. I was lonely, Alex, and I let my guard down, but it wasn't long before I realized Thomas was involved in something dark. He would talk about his business dealings in vague terms, but I could tell he was hiding something. That's when I decided to reach out to an old friend of mine who worked in law enforcement. I thought maybe I could help bring him down, redeem myself, somehow. And that's when they roped you into working for them? I asked. Yes, she confirmed. They wanted me to stay close to Thomas, gather information, get into his inner circle. It was risky, but I felt like I owed it to you, to us, to do something right for once. But as time went on, I realized just how dangerous he was, and now I'm in too deep, and I don't know how to get out. I took a deep breath, processing everything she had said. We're going to figure this out, Emily, but you need to understand that this changes everything. We're not just fighting for our marriage anymore. We're fighting for our lives. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, Alex. I just hope it's not too late. As I looked into her eyes, I saw a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who was strong, determined, and willing to fight for what she believed in. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could survive this. Together. The days that followed. Our conversation felt like a surreal nightmare. The reality of our situation hung over me like a dark cloud, every interaction tinged with a sense of impending doom. Emily and I were in this together now, but the trust between us was still fractured, a fragile thing that could shatter at any moment. I spent hours combing through the information Emily provided, trying to piece together the bigger picture. It was a complex web of deceit, crime, and manipulation, with Thomas Harper at the center of it all. The more I learned, the more I realized just how dangerous this man was. He wasn't just a businessman with a dark side. He was a criminal mastermind with connections that reached into the highest levels of society. But there was something else, something that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. As much as I wanted to believe that Emily had told me everything, there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that she was still holding something back. The way she avoided certain topics, the hesitation in her voice when I pressed her for details, it all pointed to a deeper truth that I had yet to uncover. Despite my reservations, I knew we needed to act fast. Harper's suspicions were growing, and it was only a matter of time before he made his move. I couldn't sit back and wait for that to happen. I needed to get ahead of him, to find a way to bring him down before he destroyed everything we had left. I decided to reach out to Jake again. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it was him. We met at his office, a dingy, smoke-filled room that reeked of stale coffee and desperation. Jake was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up on the desk, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he stared at the ceiling. "Alex," he greeted me, not bothering to look up. "You look like hell." "Thanks," I muttered, collapsing into the chair across from him. I need your help, Jake. I've got some information, but I don't know how to use it. He finally turned his gaze toward me, raising an eyebrow. Information? From Emily? Yeah, I said, pulling out the notes I'd been compiling. She's been feeding me details about Harper's operation, but I don't know how to make sense of it all. I need to figure out how to use this to take him down. Jake took the notes from me, flipping through them with a practiced eye. This is some good intel, Alex. But you're right. It's not enough on its own. You need something concrete, something that can tie Harper to the crimes he's been committing. Otherwise, it's just your word against his. That's the problem, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. We don't have anything solid, just bits and pieces. Jake leaned back in his chair, exhaling a cloud of smoke. Then you need to get something solid, and fast. Harper's not the kind of guy who takes chances. If he thinks you're onto him, he'll make sure you disappear before you can do anything about it. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. So, what do? We need to set a trap, Jake said, a glint of determination in his eyes. Something that'll force Harper to show his hand. But it's going to be risky. You up for it? Do I have a choice? I asked, grimacing. Jake shrugged. Not really. But if you pull this off, you'll have what you need to. Take him down for good. We spent the next few hours strategizing, going over every detail of the plan. Jake was a pro at this sort of thing, and his experience on the force was invaluable. We decided to use the information Emily had given us to lure Harper into a situation where he'd have no choice but to incriminate himself. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. The plan was set in motion the following evening. Emily played her part perfectly, reaching out to Harper with carefully crafted messages that hinted at new opportunities for his business. She was tense, her nerves on edge, but she didn't falter. I watched her closely, trying to gauge her emotions, but she was a closed book. As the night wore on, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios. What if something went wrong? What if Harper figured out what we were doing? The possibilities were endless, each one more terrifying than the last. Around midnight, Emily received a message from Harper. He was interested in the proposition she'd put forth, and he wanted to meet in person to discuss the details. It was exactly what we'd hoped for, a chance to catch him in the act. But it also meant that we were stepping into the lion's den, with no guarantee that we'd come out unscathed. Jake was waiting in the wings, ready to move in as soon as we had what we needed. The plan was simple. Emily would meet with Harper, and I would record their conversation from a distance. Once we had the evidence, Jake would swoop in with his contacts in law enforcement to make the arrest. It was risky, but it was our only option. The meeting was set for the following night at a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. Harper was cautious, insisting on a location that was off the grid, away from prying eyes. I didn't like it, but we didn't have a choice. As we drove to the warehouse, the tension between Emily and me was palpable. Neither of us spoke, the weight of what we were about to do hanging heavily in the air. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the fear and adrenaline mixing into a potent cocktail that threatened to overwhelm me. When we arrived, the warehouse was dark and foreboding, its hulking frame casting long shadows under the dim moonlight. Emily glanced at me, her eyes filled with fear, but also with a steely determination that matched my own. "We can do this," I whispered, squeezing her hand. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's get this over with." Emily entered the warehouse alone, while I stayed hidden in the shadows, my camera at the ready. I watched as she made her way through the dimly lit space, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Harper was already there, waiting for her with a predatory smile on his face. "Emily," he greeted her, his voice smooth and confident. "You're looking lovely tonight, Thomas," she replied, forcing a smile. "Let's cut to the chase. You know why I'm here." "Straight to business, huh?" Harper chuckled, his eyes narrowing. "I like that. So tell me, what's this opportunity you've been hinting at?" Emily began to lay out the details of the fake deal we'd concocted, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. I watched through the camera lens, my heart pounding as I waited for the right moment to capture Harper incriminating himself. But as the conversation progressed, something felt off. Harper was too calm, too composed. It was as if he knew exactly what was going on, and he was playing along for his own amusement. My suspicions were confirmed when I saw him glance toward a corner of the warehouse, where a figure emerged from the shadows. It was one of Harper's men, a burly enforcer with a menacing look on his face. He approached Emily slowly, his eyes locked on her with a dangerous intensity. My heart raced as I realized we were in serious trouble. Before I could react, the man grabbed Emily by the arm, yanking her toward Harper. "You really thought you could pull this off, didn't you?" Harper sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Did you honestly think I wouldn't see right through your little game?" Panic surged through me as I realized the plan had backfired. Harper had been onto us from the start, and now Emily was in grave danger. I knew I had to act fast, but my options were limited. If I rushed in now, I'd be signing both of our death warrants. As I tried to think of a way out, I saw Emily's eyes dart toward me, a silent plea for help. My mind raced, desperate to find a solution, but I was running out of time. Then, something unexpected happened. Emily moved swiftly, using the momentum of the enforcer's grip to twist free. In one fluid motion, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, concealed knife, slashing at the man's arm. He recoiled in pain, giving her just enough time to break away and put some distance between them. "Alex, now!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the warehouse. Without thinking, I leaped from my hiding spot, camera forgotten as I sprinted toward her. Harper's men were closing in, their expressions murderous, but I didn't care. All that mattered was getting to Emily and getting out alive. But Harper wasn't about to let us go that easily. As I reached Emily, he pulled out a gun, aiming it directly at us. Time seemed to slow as I saw his finger tighten on the trigger, the deadly intent in his eyes unmistakable. And then a gunshot rang out. But it wasn't Harper's. The shot echoed through the warehouse, a sharp, deafening crack that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I waited for the inevitable pain, the searing bullet that would end it all. But the pain never came. Instead, I saw Harper stagger, a look of shock and disbelief etched on his face as he clutched his chest. Blood began to seep through his fingers, staining his expensive suit as he crumpled to the ground, the gun slipping from his grasp. I turned, my eyes wide with confusion and relief, to see Jake standing at the entrance to the warehouse, his own gun still smoking from the shot. He had arrived just in time, his presence a miracle I hadn't dared to hope for. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice hoarse with emotion. Emily and I ran toward him as Harper's remaining men scrambled to regroup, their attention divided between their fallen leader and the unexpected arrival of Jake. "We need to get out of here now," Jake yelled, waving us toward the exit. "More of his men are on their way. We've got maybe a minute before this place is crawling with them." Emily and I didn't hesitate. We sprinted toward the exit, Jake covering our retreat as Harper's men hesitated, unsure whether to pursue us or tend to their dying boss. The confusion worked in our favor, buying us precious seconds as we burst through the warehouse doors and into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, the sudden change from the oppressive heat of the warehouse jarring me back to reality. My heart was pounding, my legs burning from the exertion as we raced toward Jake's car parked a short distance away. "Get in," Jake ordered, and we piled into the car, the engine roaring to life as he floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the pavement as we sped away, leaving the chaos of the warehouse behind. For a few minutes, the only sound was the roar of the engine and the rapid thudding of my heart. I glanced at Emily, who was sitting beside me, her face pale but resolute. I wanted to say something to reassure her, but the words stuck in my throat. There was too much to process, too many emotions swirling inside me to make sense of anything. Jake didn't speak either, his focus entirely on the road as he navigated the dark, winding streets that led away from the warehouse district. The tension in the car was palpable, a heavy silence that spoke volumes about the gravity of what had just happened. It wasn't until we were several miles away, deep into the outskirts of the city, that Jake finally pulled over. He parked the car in an abandoned lot, turning off the engine as he exhaled a long, weary sigh. "That was too damn close," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I knew it was a long shot, but I didn't expect Harper to be one step ahead like that. "We almost didn't make it out," I said, my voice shaking with the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "If you hadn't shown up when you did," Jake waved me off. "Don't think about that. The important thing is that you're both alive. But we're not out of the woods yet. Harper's men aren't going to let this slide. They'll be coming for us. And we need to be ready." Emily, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "What do we do next? Harper's dead, but his organization is still out there, and they're going to want revenge." "We need to disappear," Jake said bluntly. "At least for a while. Lay low until we can figure out our next move. I've got some safe houses we can use, places off the grid where they won't be able to find us." "But we can't just run forever," I protested. "We need to finish this, take down Harper's organization for good." Jake sighed, his expression grim. "I know, Alex, but we're in no position to do that right now. Harper's death will create a power vacuum, and there'll be a lot of chaos as his lieutenants fight for control. That might work in our favor, but it's also going to make things unpredictable. We need to regroup, gather our resources, and wait for the right moment to strike." Emily nodded, though I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to fight back as much as I did, but she also knew Jake was right. We were outmatched, outnumbered, and still reeling from the night's events. Reluctantly, I agreed. "Okay, we'll lay low for now, but we can't let this go on for too long. The longer we wait, the more time they have to regroup." "Agreed," Jake said. "But for now, let's focus on staying alive. I'll make the arrangements for the safe house. We'll leave in the morning." With the plan set, we settled into an uneasy silence, the weight of the night's events pressing down on us. Emily and I exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between us. We were in this together now, for better or worse. The betrayal, the lies, the danger, we'd have to face it all as a team if we had any hope of surviving. As I leaned back in my seat, exhaustion finally catching up with me, I couldn't help but wonder how much more we could take. We had come so far, but the road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, with no guarantee that we'd make it to the end unscathed. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. We had survived this far against all odds, and as long as we kept fighting, as long as we stayed together, there was still a chance we could come out of this alive. Chapter 9. We spent the night in a dingy motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the walls are thin enough to hear the regrets of those on the other side. Sleep was elusive, my mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Emily curled up beside me, her breathing slow and steady as she finally succumbed to exhaustion. I envied her ability to find some semblance of peace, even if it was fleeting. Jake had left us to make the necessary arrangements for our move to the safe house. He promised to return by dawn, but I knew that every minute we spent in that motel was a gamble. Harper's death had undoubtedly sent shockwaves through his organization, and it was only a matter of time before they came looking for those responsible. As the first light of morning crept through the threadbare curtains, I felt a sense of unease settle in the pit of my stomach. The night had been too quiet, the silence almost deafening. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Emily stirred beside me, her eyes fluttering. "Open!" She looked at me with a mixture of fear and determination, the same emotions that had kept us going for so long. "Is it time?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Almost," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Jake should be here soon." She nodded, sitting up and stretching the tension from her limbs. "I can't believe we're still alive," she said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "After everything—" "We're not out of the woods yet," I reminded her, though I couldn't hide the small smile that tugged at my lips. "But we're getting closer." We packed our few belongings, the weight of what we were leaving behind heavy on our shoulders. There was no going back now, no chance to return to the lives we once knew. We were fugitives caught in a deadly game with no clear end in sight. Jake arrived just as we finished, his expression grim but resolute. "Everything's set," he said, handing me a set of keys. The safe house is about 3 hours from here, deep in the woods. It's off the grid, completely secure. You'll be safe there." "And you?" I asked, knowing full well what his answer would be. "I'll be around," he said, a wry smile on his lips. "Got some loose ends to tie up, but I'll keep in touch. You two just focus on staying alive." Emily gave him a tight hug, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Jake, for everything." "Just doing my job," he said gruffly, though I could see the emotion in his eyes as he returned the embrace. "Take care of each other." With that, we left the motel behind, the city fading into the distance as we drove toward the safe house. The journey was long and tense, the roads winding through thick forests that seemed to swallow us whole. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Harper's men in pursuit, but the roads remained empty. As we neared the safe house, the trees grew denser, the path narrowing until it was barely wide enough for the car to pass. The isolation was palpable, the silence of the forest a stark contrast to the chaos we had left behind. When we finally arrived, the safe house was just as Jake had described, a small, unassuming cabin nestled deep in the woods, hidden from prying eyes. We unpacked in silence, the weight of our situation hanging heavily in the air. The cabin was sparsely furnished, but it had the essentials: a bed, a small kitchen, and a fireplace that crackled with the warmth of a fire Jake must have lit before leaving. It was a far cry from the life we had known, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered. As night fell, we sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. Emily was lost in thought, her eyes distant as she stared into the fire. I knew she was thinking about everything we had been through, the choices that had led us here, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. "Do you think we'll ever be able to go back?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to believe that we can. It's the only way we'll survive this." She nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. "I just want this to be over," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I want to go back to the way things were." "I know," I said, pulling her into my arms. "I want that too. But we can't change the past. All we can do is fight for the future." We held each other for a long time, the warmth of the fire and the steady rhythm of our breathing the only sounds in the room. In that moment, I realized just how much we had lost and how much we still stood to lose, but I also knew that we had come too far to give up now. We had to see this through, no matter what it took. The days passed slowly in the safe house, the isolation both a blessing and a curse. It gave us time to rest, to regroup, but it also gave us too much time to think, to dwell on everything that had gone wrong. We were safe, but we were also trapped, our lives on hold as we waited for the next move. Jake kept in touch, his updates brief but reassuring. The chaos within Harper's organization was growing, the power vacuum left by his death creating a storm of infighting and betrayal. It was exactly what we had hoped for, but it also meant that the danger was far from over. We were still targets, still in the crosshairs of those who wanted revenge. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Jake called with news that made my blood run cold. "There's been a development," he said, his voice tense. "One of Harper's lieutenants, a guy named Vincent, has taken control. He's ruthless, even more dangerous than Harper was. And he's coming for you, Alex. He wants to finish what Harper started." I clenched my fists, anger boiling in my veins. "What do we do?" "You have to leave the safe house," Jake said. "It's not safe anymore. Vincent has resources, and he's determined to find you. I've arranged for a new location, but you need to move quickly. He's already on your trail." The thought of running again, of leaving behind the one place where we had felt safe, was almost too much to bear. But I knew we didn't have a choice. We had to keep moving to stay one step ahead of Vincent and his men. As we packed up our belongings, the weight of our situation pressed down on me like a vice. We were being hunted, and there was no end in sight. But as I looked at Emily, her face set with determination, I knew we couldn't give up. We had to keep fighting, for each other, for the future we still hoped to build. The night was dark and unforgiving as we left the safe house behind, the road ahead uncertain and fraught with danger. But we didn't look back. There was nothing left for us in the past, only the hope that we could survive the storm that lay ahead. Chapter 10. The journey to the new safe house was fraught with tension. The weight of impending danger pressed down on us, the knowledge that Vincent was hunting us like prey gnawing at my nerves. Every shadow, every sound on the road felt like a potential threat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, tracked. Jake's instructions had been clear. Follow the back roads, avoid main highways, and trust no one. The new safe house was located deep in the mountains, even more isolated than the last. The thought of hiding out in such a remote location filled me with a sense of claustrophobia, but I knew it was our only chance at survival. As we wound our way through the narrow mountain roads, the car's headlights slicing through the darkness, I couldn't help but think about how much our lives had changed. Just a few weeks ago, I'd been a private investigator chasing after cheating spouses, my biggest worry being whether I'd get paid on time. Now, I was on the run from a criminal organization, my life in constant jeopardy with nothing but uncertainty ahead. Emily sat beside me, silent and tense, her eyes scanning the dark landscape for any sign of danger. We were both exhausted, the adrenaline that had kept us going for so long now giving way to bone-deep weariness. But there was no time to rest, no time to let our guard down. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached the new safe house. It was a small, weather-beaten cabin perched on the edge of a cliff, overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. The isolation was absolute. The nearest town was miles away, and there was no cell service, no way to contact the outside world except for a satellite phone Jake had left for us. We entered the cabin cautiously, our nerves on edge. The interior was sparse but functional, with a wood-burning stove, a single bed, and a few supplies Jake had stocked. It was clear that this place was meant for one thing: survival. As we settled in, the silence of the mountains pressed in on us, amplifying the tension between us. Emily and I had been through so much together, but the strain was beginning to show. We were both on edge, the constant fear and uncertainty taking its toll. That night, as we sat in front of the small fireplace, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls, Emily finally spoke up. "How long can we keep doing this, Alex? How long before they catch up to us?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I didn't know how long we could keep running. Every move we made felt like a gamble, and the odds were increasingly stacked against us. But I couldn't let her see how scared I was. "We'll keep going as long as we have to," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Jake's doing everything he can to keep us safe. We just have to trust him." Emily nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I feel like we're running in circles, like no matter what we do, they'll always be one step ahead." I pulled her close, trying to offer comfort, though I knew my words were hollow. "We'll get through this, Emily. I promise. We'll find a way to end this, one way or another." The days in the mountain safe house passed slowly, the isolation gnawing at our sanity. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional howl of wind or the distant call of an animal. We had nothing to do but wait, to hope that Jake would contact us with news, but the waiting was its own kind of torture. One afternoon, as I was chopping wood outside, I heard the distant rumble of an engine. My heart skipped a beat, fear gripping my chest. I dropped the axe and ran inside, grabbing the gun Jake had left us. "Emily, get down!" I hissed, pulling her away from the window as the sound of the engine grew louder. We crouched in the shadows, our breaths shallow, waiting for whoever was approaching. The minutes stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the sound of the engine faded, replaced by the silence of the mountains once more. I slowly peeked out the window, my heart pounding in my ears. The road was empty, no sign of anyone nearby. "False alarm," I muttered, though the fear lingered. "But we need to be ready. They could find us at any moment." The days dragged on, each one blending into the next. The isolation, the fear, the constant vigilance, it all began to wear us down. We were prisoners in our own minds, trapped by the endless waiting and the gnawing uncertainty of what was to come. Then, one evening, As we were preparing a meager dinner, the satellite phone rang. The sound was jarring, breaking the heavy silence of the cabin. My heart raced as I answered, praying it was Jake with good news. "Alex," Jake's voice crackled through the line, strained and urgent. "You need to get out of there. Now." My blood ran cold. "What? Why? What's happened?" "Vincent found you," Jake said, his words coming in rapid, panicked bursts. "He's coming with a team. You don't have much time. I'm sending coordinates to a safe spot where I'll meet you. But you have to move now, Alex. They're closing in." I didn't hesitate. "Emily, we have to go," I shouted, already gathering our things. The look of fear in her eyes mirrored my own. But there was no time to waste. We grabbed what we could carry and bolted from the cabin, the cold night air biting at our skin as we ran toward the car. The mountains loomed around us, dark and forbidding, as if they were trying to trap us in their grasp. The drive down the mountain was harrowing, the narrow roads twisting and turning with dangerous abandon. I pushed the car to its limits, the engine straining as we sped away from the cabin, our only thought to put as much distance between us and Vincent's men as possible. Jake's coordinates led us to an abandoned mine, hidden deep in the wilderness. We arrived just as dawn was breaking, the first light of day casting long shadows over the rugged landscape. The mine was a relic of a forgotten time, its entrance half collapsed and overgrown with weeds. We stumbled out of the car, exhausted and desperate, searching for any sign of Jake. But the area was deserted, the silence almost deafening. "Jake," I called out, my voice echoing off the rock walls. There was no answer, only the hollow sound of my own voice. Fear gripped me as I realized we might be too late. "He said he'd meet us here," I muttered, scanning the area frantically. "Where is he?" Before Emily could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the mine entrance. We turned, hearts pounding, as a figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Jake. Vincent stepped into the light, a cruel smile on his lips. "I have to admit, Alex," he said, his voice smooth and taunting, "you've been a worthy opponent. But this game is over." My blood ran cold as I realized the trap we had walked into. "Where's Jake?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. Vincent's smile widened. "Let's just say he won't be joining us. And as for you, well, I think you know how this ends." Emily clutched my arm, her fear palpable. "Alex, what do we do?" I tightened my grip on the gun, my mind racing. We were outnumbered, outgunned, with no backup and no escape. But I couldn't let Vincent win, not after everything we had been through. "Emily, get behind me," I whispered, raising the gun as Vincent's men surrounded us. "We're not going down without a fight." The tension was electric, the air thick with the threat of violence. My finger hovered over the trigger, every muscle in my body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. But before I could fire, a shot rang out, echoing through the mountains. Vincent's eyes widened in shock as he stumbled, a look of disbelief on his face. He clutched his chest, blood seeping through his fingers as he collapsed to the ground. I spun around, searching for the source of the shot, my heart pounding with hope and fear. There, standing on a ridge above the mine, was Jake. He lowered his rifle, a grim look on his face as he surveyed the scene. "Let's finish this," he called down to us, his voice carrying over the distance. With renewed determination, I turned back to Vincent's men who were now panicking, their leader dead at their feet. "You heard him," I growled, raising the gun. "This ends now." The fight that followed was brief and brutal. Jake provided cover from above as Emily and I fought our way through Vincent's men, the desperation giving us strength. It was chaotic, violent, and terrifying, but we had something they didn't: hope. The hope that we could finally be free. When the last of Vincent's men fell, we stood in the cold dawn light, our breaths ragged, our bodies battered but alive. Jake made his way down from the ridge, his expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's finally over." Emily and I exchanged a look, the weight of his words sinking in. We had won. We had survived. But the cost had been high, and the scars would remain long after the dust had settled. As we stood there, the sun rising over the mountains, I realized that our fight had changed us in ways we couldn't fully understand. We were no longer the same people who had started this journey, but we had made it through to the other side, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could start again.